there. Lately, I've been combining wood and resin to create what I call earth rings, using Smooth-On's EpoxAcast 690, UVO pigments, and Cast Magic powders. I combine them with interesting pieces of wood to create some really neat effects. I'd like to show you my process. I found a suitably figured piece of cherry burl and looked for a section with enough detail to get the effect I wanted. I measured off a 1/2 inch thick section, at least 1 1/4 by 1 1/4 inches in length and width. I'm going to be trimming some of the wood away, but this gives me room to play around with the final fit. The more crazy topography I can capture, the better the effect. I knew what size ring I was making ahead of time, so to save on resin and machining time, I drilled a 1 1/4 inch diameter hole in a 2 inch square piece of 3/4 inch thick HDPE that I had available, using a Forstner bit and a jig to secure the HDPE. Many traditional ring blanks are 1 1/2 inches square, so by casting into a round space, I used about 40% less resin. The HDPE will separate easily from the cured resin. I could also have used nylon, acrylic, or wood sealed with acrylic lacquer. I'll be applying a mold release later as well. Using the hole I cut as a stencil, I marked off the section of wood I wanted. I wanted the wood to make up a bit more than half of the space of the ring blank. I made a rough cut and then sanded the wood down to match where I marked it off. When I'm happy with the cut, I'm ready to put the mold together. I cut a piece of melamine board to the same outer dimensions as my block of HDPE to serve as the base of my mold. I brushed a small amount of Ease Release 205 in the center of the melamine, leaving the edges uncoated. I'll need the edges clean so I can glue my block down on the melamine. I also applied the release to the inside of the hole in the HDPE. Using a hot glue gun, I ran a line of glue all the way around the outer edge of the melamine and affixed the HDPE to it, pressing down to get a good seal. I cut some thin strips of sulfur-free Sculptek soft clay and applied them around the hot glue joint to fully seal it and prevent any liquid epoxy from leaking out. Some medium thick or gel instant glue applied to the wood will keep it adhered to the melamine base and prevent it from floating up when casting into the mold. The release agent allows for easy separation from the base. I snugged it up against one side of the hole and pressed down. At that point, my mold was ready for casting. For this, I used EpoxAcast 690, a clear epoxy resin that cures strong and rigid and machines well. I measured out my EpoxAcast 690 in a 100A to 30B ratio by weight per the technical bulletin. To get my color right, I mixed a very small amount of UVO blue pigment into part A of the EpoxAcast 690. I want some translucency in the casting, and UVO is opaque in larger concentrations. No more than 3% of the total weight of the mixed material should be added to avoid cure inhibition. To get a pearlescent effect, I then added some Cast Magic Silver Bullet to part A and mixed well. Part B is then poured into part A and mixed thoroughly, scraping the sides and bottom to ensure an even mix. EpoxAcast has a long pot life, 5 hours, so I don't have to rush when mixing. I poured the resin into the open space around the wood and let it seek its level. EpoxAcast is a low viscosity resin and de-airs easily, but with a highly figured piece like this, I like to use a pressure chamber whenever possible for my castings. Adding pressure forces resin into pores and small cracks in the wood and minimizes any air pockets. A pressure setting of 60 psi is recommended. I will include a link to a tutorial on pressure casting here if you'd like to learn more. EpoxAcast 690 normally has a demold time of 24 hours, but with a small casting like this, I recommend waiting at least 36 hours, especially since we will be machining the casting later on. This resin generates heat in proportion to its mass and needs this heat in order to cure. Because the calculated cure time is based on a larger mass, a smaller amount like this will need longer to cure. Once pressurized, I can leave the piece to cure. Since I share this workspace with other people, for safety, I left a note indicating that the pressure chamber is in use. After 36 hours, I'm ready to demold. I opened the pressure valve and waited for the chamber to depressurize before opening it. I used a chisel to scrape off the clay and to separate the melamine from the HDPE block. I supported the HDPE on blocks and tapped a wooden dowel in the center to remove the ring blank. I trimmed off the excess resin with a sharp blade, and now I'm ready to put it on the lathe. The blank looks good. I loaded the blank into a lathe chuck equipped with pin jaws to hold the blank securely. My ring size is a 9, and a 3/4 inch Forstner bit is the perfect size to drill out the center of the ring blank. It's a good idea to lower the motor's speed to around 500 to 800 RPM when drilling into resin. This will avoid heating up the bit too much and softening the resin. I moved the bit slowly in small increments, backing it out occasionally to clear the cuttings. I loosened the pin jaws and backed the ring blank out a bit more than the final width of the ring, and retightened the chuck. Using a parting tool, I cut the ring slightly wider than my final width, using steady but gentle pressure. I like the pattern in that burl. The contrasting shades of the burl really add interest. The remainder of the blank looked good enough for a second ring, so I went ahead and cut another rough. Burl can be soft in pockets, so I stabilized the rough rings with some thin instant glue. Back on the lathe to trim down the rough ring, I used an expanding mandrel to hold it in place. I could also have used a wooden dowel turned on the lathe to accommodate the ring size. I trimmed up the edges of the ring using a detailing tool. Using a roughing tool, I brought the height of the ring down to approximately where I wanted it, then switched to the finishing tool to shape it. The ring is taking shape by this time. I brought it over to the sander to clean up the edges a bit, then back for more shaping. This happened a lot. Once I had the ring's profile the way I liked, I used a fine grit sanding pad to smooth it out in preparation for polishing. A paper towel works for me to get the dust off. I could use compressed air or a microfiber cloth too. One way to quickly add shine to the ring is to use successive coats of thin instant glue while the lathe is turning on low speed. Move quickly and only use small amounts of glue at a time. Once I was happy with this part of the coating, I took it off the lathe and coated the inside and edges, using a small amount at a time as it cures quickly. Since I was able to get an extra rough cut out of the ring blank, I decided to mount it on a stainless steel ring core. I had to enlarge the inner diameter of the ring in order to fit the core, So I used an adjustable boring head to route it out. It took a few passes to get it right. It's a good idea to rough up the outside of the ring core before gluing it into the rough ring. I used a medium thick instant glue for this. After mounting the ring onto an adjustable mandrel, I then went about shaping it, evening up the edges to align with the ring core. This time, I decided to use a finish and sealing wax to buff the ring out, followed by a polishing wax. This left a rich, lustrous satin finish. Now that the rings are finished, I tried them on and they fit perfectly. They look great. I had a lot of fun making these rings, and I think they look pretty cool. You can try experimenting with different colors and effects and using other natural materials besides wood. Possibilities are endless.